Part 2, Chapter 32, Human Levitation, True History and How-To Guide, written by Preston Dennett. What kinds of people levitate? An analysis of the kinds of people who levitate reveals that an equal number of men and women levitate. People of all ages, virtually in all cultures, report levitation. There is strong evidence that people who are spiritually inclined are more likely to levitate. Each culture has their holy person, a priest, a shaman, a medicine man, a sorcerer, psychic, medium, saint, yogi, fakir, a mystic, a clever man, a magician, etc. These are the types of people who levitate. Therefore, it appears that the difference between the various types of levitation may be a matter of cultural interpretation. In other words, despite the dissimilarities in the accounts, again, it appears that the same basic phenomena is in operation. Some cultures may have been able to evolve further with the understanding and use of levitation. However, it may be that there is little fundamental difference between any types of levitation, writes Fodor. Such clear contemporary testimony makes Holmes' levitations vie in importance with any hagiographic account. Oliver Leroy, with ecclesiastic bias, attributes mediumistic levitations to diabolic agency, but it is difficult to see more than a quantitative difference of levitating power between saints, demoniacs, and mediums. Dr. D. Scott Rojo has also noticed that each culture interprets levitation uniquely. Every culture is automatically prejudiced in believing that it and only it is scientific and sophisticated, and that earlier reports and studies are either invalid or suspect. As for levitation phenomena, certain physical mediums have been known to be levitated during well-controlled experiments. Because of this, levitations reported by the saints probably represent a peculiar form of telekinesis. Researcher Colin Wilson states that the case Riley, under Christianity, magic became black magic, and its power derived from demons, or angelic intervention, instead of from man's own hidden faculties. A monk who happened to possess mediumistic powers might find himself burnt alive or canonized. Andrew Lane succinctly summarizes the controversy. Saint or sorcerer has always been a delicate question. Lang was one of the first paranormal investigators to realize that the accounts of levitation were truly worldwide. As he writes, when we find savage Bira arcs in Australia, fakirs in India, saints in medieval Europe, a gentleman's butler in Ireland, boys in Somerset and Midlothian, a young warrior in Zululand, Miss Nancy Wellesley at Epworth in 1716, and Mr. Daniel Home in London in 1856 to 1870, all triumphing under the law of gravitation, all floating in the air. How are we to explain the uniformity of stories palpably ridiculous? Good question. How can this happen? Doesn't levitation defy everything that we know about gravity? The problem is we don't know much about gravity, as these type of accounts so painfully point out. This is the crux of the problem. In solving the mystery of levitation, it all comes down to explaining the phenomenon of gravity. Unfortunately, mainstream science has never been able to fully explain the force of gravity. How can we understand levitation if we don't even understand gravity? Writes Steve Richards. The fact that science cannot explain gravitation means that science cannot condemn levitation. Charles and Jordan write, unaided human flight, no matter how astounding and mystifying, is not contrary to natural law. It is simply an event that, in nature, science has not yet explained. Authority in modern mysticism, Patricia Treese, astutely points out that the fantastic nature of levitation has caused it to be largely ignored by mainstream science. As she writes, science has no help to offer as to how the phenomenon works, insisting that gravity is not breachable. Scientists have never taken levitation seriously enough to even postulate how it might work. Writes Australian researcher Simon Harvey Wilson, Religion and science have always been an uneasy relationship. Research into levitation is hampered by centuries of prejudice about witches, possession, and spiritual abilities. Explanations for human levitation seem to depend on the spiritual beliefs of those concerned. With minor variations, the explanation for human levitation is that the spiritual forces are responsible. On the other hand, some people claim that they alone are responsible for their levitation. It may eventually be discovered that human levitation is a load of nonsense, but I doubt this will ever turn out to be the case. There have been too many surprisingly similar reports throughout history from all over the world. I suspect that there's smoke, that there probably is fire. Any scientist who asserts that levitation is impossible because science cannot currently explain this is frankly just an idiot who should hand in his lab coat and write to someone who understands research is about exploring the unknown, not ignoring it. Of course, sometimes scientists have looked into the situation. After witnessing Holmes' levitation under controlled conditions, scientist William Crookes concluded these experiments appear conclusively to establish the existence of a new force in some kind of unknown manner connected with the human organism, for which convenience may be called the psychic force. Physicist Bruce Smith points out that the superconductors are known to be surrounded by a field of energy known as the Meissner field, which actually has the effect of neutralizing gravity. While scientists are able to produce mechanical superconductors with which they have levitated live frogs, Smith speculates that the human body itself might be a superconductor under the right conditions. As he writes, our bodies might be able to create superconductivity within them via the pathways of trance-inducing practices. This internal superconductivity may be like a switch that we turn on to enter a levitating state. Nandor Fodor writes, how is levitation done? We know nothing about the suspect, but a little of the power which accomplishes it. The loss of weight in the levitated body may be in appearance due to the effect of a force which lifts or, if internally applied, makes the body buoyant. According to the Catholic Church, there are three explanations for levitation: the grace of God, the influence of the devil, and outside forces. Unfortunately, this does not explain levitation, as Patricia Treese writes. In theory, then, I could propose St. Teresa levitated because her body was acted on by God, Daniel Home because he had a rare psychic gift, and Mahayasa levitated aided by the devil to torment his poor wife. I'm kidding, of course. Distinctions are not so easy. While admitting that levitation may have different causes, Treese notes the obvious relationship between levitation and holiness, because it is so difficult to distinguish the purely supernatural from the psychophysical, even in saints. Levitation is never accepted as miraculous proof of sanctity in Catholic investigations. Assuming the presence of the crucial virtues of heroic charity, heroic humility, heroic trust in God, etc., well-verified levitation can be accepted as corroborative evidence of sanctity. However, this is important for us because it means testimonies of levitation are not just ignored, but looked at carefully to rule out fraud, delusion, and heresy. Genuine levitation among Catholics is regularly associated with holiness. Testimonies from the beatification process and other trustworthy sources simply contain too many eyewitnesses, broad daylight accounts for the relationship to be coincidental. If, as perplexing as the thought may be, it appears that humans do levitate and that those who do so are holy, the obvious question is, can we finger the psycho-spiritual physical connection between the sanctity and levitation? To a degree, I think we can. Speaking in non-theological terms, levitation of the primary type appears an extreme manifestation of the walking on air sensation of blissful love. If your first love made you feel like you were walking on air, isn't it possible that the sanctified body, ravished by the love of God, at times breaks through the gravity and actually rises in bliss? Writes Fodor. In Catholic mysticism, levitation is ascribed to the grace of God. Ecclesiastically, this is a final explanation. Scientifically, it is entirely meaningless. How does religious ecstasy counteract or at least partially gravitation? The question leads us back to the ancient conflict between matter and spirit. Are there spiritual laws as well as material laws? Is the material law subservient to the spiritual law? Pioneering levitation researcher Oliver Leroy attempted to refine the Church's theories, writing that mediumistic levitations were caused by a diabolical agency, whereas ecstatic levitations were caused by a divine agency. While he remained skeptical of many accounts, calling them divine hallucinations, his final conclusion was unambiguously positive. As he writes, following very ancient traditions from diverse origins, the human body is able to escape, under certain conditions, the law of gravity. As to how levitation occurred, Leroy's thoughts were more vague. He wrote that levitation seemed to rely upon the level of spiritual advancement of the would-be levitator. The moral dispositions and the way of life of the subject to levitation are a necessary condition to take into consideration as to the cause of the phenomena. A moral ambience seems to be required for the production of the phenomena in question. Indeed, levitation has a constant precedent of moral circumstances, a manner of thinking, of perceiving, of living. While this may be true for saints and mystics, there are many cases of spontaneous and mediumistic levitation involving people of normal or even dubious moral circumstances. Despite his belief in levitation, Leroy was unable to reconcile his seemingly paranormal attributes with the known laws of science. As he wrote, the problem of levitation is posed in terms which are repugnant to the methods of physics. The pseudoscientific solutions proposed in order to explain the origins of this phenomenon are without value, and there is no indication that one will be found in the future. Most early levitation researchers postulated theories involving spirits, writes medieval scholar Augustine Calmet. It is not absolutely impossible that a person may be raised into the air and transported to some very high and distant place by order or by permission of God, by good or evil spirits, but we must own that the thing is of rare occurrence. Was it by misinstration of angels, or by the artifice of the seducing spirit, who wished to inspire her, a levitating nun, with sentiments of vanity and pride? Or was it the natural effect of divine love, or fervor of devotion in these persons? The writers who give us these particulars do not say what was the cause, whether these ecstatic elevations from the ground were produced by the fervor of the Holy Spirit, or the ministry of good angels, or by a miraculous favor of God, whose desire thus to do honor to his servants in the eyes of men. Writes Father Herbert Thurston. Assuming, then, that we have reasonable ground for crediting the fact of levitation, there remains the question of its possible explanation. Theologians, for the most part, offer the rough and ready solution that in this case of holy people it is a manifestation of divine power, affected perhaps through the ministry of angels, but that is such case that there are of Simon Magus, sorcerers, and spiritualistic mediums. It is the work of the devil. Without venturing to reject this explanation outright, I find certain difficulties too complex to summarize here, which suggest that it would be wise to suspend our judgment. I may confess that, as regards the levitation of material objects without contact, the spiritualistic evidence seems to me quite convincing. And if a table can be suspended in the air, it is hard to see why a man cannot. Sir Oliver Lodge adumbrated a spiritistic theory to explain these phenomena. Professor Charles Richet, a materialistic one. They attribute strange activities to the ether, to teleplasm, to cryptaesthesia, etc. But it seems to me that it is the present state of our knowledge that we cannot even decide whether the effects observed do or do not transcend the possible range of what may be called the psychophysical forces of nature. Even today, the belief that levitation is caused by demons persists. In 1973, modern witchcraft historian Montague Summers wrote, "Angels, be they blessed spirits or demons, have the power to move matter. The levitation of sorcerers is affected by the agency of evil forces, devils who bestow this favor upon the auxiliary and a companion. It stands to reason that Satan, the ape of God, must imitate and caricature the divine phenomena of mystical levitation." J.J. von Gores was among the first modern European writers on the subject to state that levitation is an innate human ability, but one which is activated only in a soul well prepared by the ascetic life. He wrote that levitation occurs as the result of a kind of interior tempest arousing by the equilibrium of the mechanical forces of the organism being suddenly upset. Early researcher Abbott Ribbett wrote that most cases of levitation can be explained by the preponderance of the spirit to seize the body. This popular idea is echoed by Abbot Hanapier, who wrote, "The body and the soul, the spirit and the material are united so that the two substances nearly make one, in a way that one is able to say that the body is spiritualized or that the soul is materialized. It is of the same nature of the soul to command the material in the ordinary state. We must know very little to be able to understand this ability of the soul on the body. We must assume that, disengaged from the bonds of the body, it takes superiority over it, and the body becomes its slave."